We were created to defend Dahomey, the honeypot object of desire. Can the country where so much courage flourishes give up its worth to foreigners? As long as we live, how mad the people who would try to impose their law on us. Songs in Lyrica de Roi de Dahomey, 1962. This is an example of the song lyrics the woman soldier of Dahomey performed at military parades. These songs were accompanied by different kinds of drums, flutes, and lyrics that emphasized their devotion to the king and their success in battle. These elite troop of women soldiers were the warriors who contributed to the military power of the Kingdom of Dahomey in the 18th and 19th century and are the subject of the new movie, The Woman King. The movie is a historical epic inspired by true events that happened in the Kingdom of Dahomey, one of the most powerful states in Africa in the 18th and 19th century. The movie is centered on the Amazons, a fun, all-woman army of the Kingdom of Dahomey. This video will analyze and comment on the historical accuracy of the costumes in the Woman King movie. But before we dive in, let's look at the historical background of Dahomey and its warriors. Dahomey is located in the present-day Republic of Benin, neighbored on the west by Togo, north by Burkina Faso and Niger, and on the east by Nigeria. Dahomey was founded by the Fon people around 1625, and in the Fon language, the women warriors are called Agojie, Mino, which means our mother, or Ahosi, king's wives, before the Europeans called them Amazons, after the mythical Amazons of antiquity. Before the 18th century, the country's history was told through oral histories, through songs, dance, and visual arts. When Europeans got to the region, they recorded their written observations, so the majority of what we know about the Agojie, such as their way of dress, comes from these records. Like any other African group at the time, the Fon peoples borrowed cultural practices from their neighbors. For example, from the Yoruba of current-day Nigeria and the Akans of current-day Ghana. The enslaved people taken from these neighboring regions also influenced the tradition of dress in Dahomey. During the period, different activities such as war required special clothing to protect the fighter and to impress their enemies. Unlike other movies about African history, this movie does a great job mirroring the dress practices of the time, in this case, 18th to 19th century Dahomey. Here are some good examples. In the film, the women, specifically when they're in the palace, are wearing these smocks. Here's an example. So these smocks were worn by the Agojie soldiers during the 18th and 19th century, and the smocks allowed easy gestures and mobility when fighting. They were typically worn with trousers called chahunka, which were tied at the waist, cuffed under the knees, loose and baggy between the waist and the knees, allowing easy movement. The smocks were made out of strip woven cotton fabric that were locally made. Chahunka pants resemble the pants worn by horsemen across the Sahel, where the garment probably originated. So the chahunka was worn with a smock known as akonmeru, which was loose at the upper torso, tapered slightly and flared at the bottom. Here's an example. Sometimes a cotton belt secured it. This uniform was incomplete without a round hat adorned with the symbol of the company. So according to the records, this is how the Agojie soldiers dressed during the 18th to 19th century. And bringing it back to the movie, this is essentially how the Agojie soldiers were depicted. They wore smocks with matching bottoms, probably strip woven. Some of them had belts, and the only thing missing from what the sources show were that in the movie you see a lot of the weavers in the palace. They're close by, which is historically accurate and also gives us a picture of why the king dressed the way he did. The king would historically appear dressed in a large piece of cloth, either locally woven or imported, hanging from his left shoulders or tied around his waist. He would wear a hat called abeti. Cloth among the Fon people was not only solely intended to protect the body but to express wealth. In the movie, the local people were wearing a lot of hand-woven cloth and starch resist dye cloths like batik or adide. Another important element of dress we see in the movie is the use of cowrie shells. By the 18th century, the cowrie shells had become the currency of choice along the trade route of West Africa. It conserved its status as a means of payment and a symbol of wealth and power until the 20th century, so it makes sense that the warriors would be adorned in these shells. In many ways, the more shells a warrior had, the higher their rank. With that being said, here's a breakdown of how the soldiers dressed according to rank and circumstance. So historically speaking, the huntress, Beto, in the fun language, they were dressed in brown blouses and brown and blue knee-length shorts. Around the head, they wore a band of iron crowned with two antelope horns symbolizing power, strength, and flexibility. They were armed with long rifles and curved daggers attached to their belts. The brown tops were most likely strip-woven cotton and dyed in mud, in the same way the bogolan is produced. This is kind of my analysis. And the skirts were probably cotton dyed with a resist, using the resist dye method, using indigo, which would make them blue. Again, this is just my assumption based on what I know about how cloth was made at the time. Then we have the riflewomen, whose uniform consisted of a belt made of banana leaves equipped with cartridges. They also wore a blue blouse tied at the waist with a belt and white and blue striped culottes. Their headdress was a white skull cap decorated with a blue cayman. I couldn't find a good photo for this. Hopefully this helped. And then we had the archers, Gohento, who wore a short blue tunic and the same white skull cap decorated with the same blue cayman as the riflewomen. Then the reapers, who I'm assuming dressed similarly to the archers. And then we had the gunners, the Agojie, who wore a red and blue blouse and culotte, which is probably very similar to what the actresses wore in the Woman King movie. Now we're going to look at the outfits, attires, dress, costumes on some of the historical images and compare them to the costumes in the movie. The king, I kind of talked about this earlier. To me, it's pretty obvious where the inspiration was drawn from. And you have the image of this smock, which I think also inspired the costumes. Then obviously this one, and then more. And then for me, this one is, look at this. You can tell that they drew inspiration from Princess Fasi to create the costumes for Viola's character.